I want to bring in my guest, another fan favorite, KJ. No, KJ, no. There we are. For some reason, KJ, I don't know your thing about heart yet. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher, specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. He's contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator. One censored by Amazon is available at iacenter.org. He is host of the China Report that's on Breakthrough News Network, another great network and another great channel. KJ, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
It is a pleasure to have you. There are a lot of people screaming right now. I would say those people are in, how can I say it? I'm trying to be very specific with my words. Let's say in a specific camp of people that are, Darius, Dennis, can I, oh, the timing is off. The timing is off. Dennis, I'm going to have to, okay, fair enough. I'm going to have to bring you back on a different day. I'm sorry. Okay, fair enough. That was a mistake with the guest. I misunderstood one of the emails that my guest sent me, and there was an overlap. KJ, a lot of people are screaming right now that all things being equal, that there's a sense among some people, let's say in alternative media, that China and Russia are not doing enough. And you can see it on social media. You can see the screaming. You can see, I don't quite know what they expect, especially since the war has just effectively started. No other forces have gotten involved, at least not directly. The United States is definitely backing it, but they haven't necessarily put their own military in order to run bombing raids. At least we don't think so. Iran is saying that there's an American that they downed in one of the planes, but either way, China is giving resources. I mean, there have been cargo planes that apparently have been taken off and landing in Tehran for the last several days. There have been strongly worded condemnations coming out of Russia, China, Pakistan, et cetera, saying this is outrageous. Give me a take on this, on how you think China is looking at this and playing this. Because I suspect well, just give me your take first and we can step into it.
Well, as you point out, it's early days. The U.S. is threatening to attack, and it seems like the attack is pretty imminent. We're seeing all the kind of logistical preparations for an attack. So that may be the case, but it isn't a done deal yet. And under those circumstances, I think it's unwise for any other player to show their hand before, the cards are put down. So, I don't know what China is preparing. Certainly, they have come out strongly in favor of Iran, as has Russia, as has Pakistan, as has even, other countries in the neighborhood. They certainly don't want a war. But I don't think that they're going to show their hand until it's necessary. And that has always been Chinese, doctrine.
And it's pragmatic. I mean, the fact of the matter is they don't know what they're even going to need, per se. I mean, right now, Israel is getting taken apart in a way that I've never seen them get taken apart. It is one thing, apparently, to shoot women and children in the back. It's another thing to have to fight a proper military. And they're finding that out the hard way with their cities effectively turned to rubble. The cargo planes that have been taking off and landing into Tehran, I know I'm asking this question knowing that you can't necessarily know entirely, but I would imagine that is missiles, some kind of air defense, like effectively a replenishment of things that they require, maybe even metals. Like, has there been any information that has been given in regards to what those cargo planes are? I mean, they've been turning off their transponders before they touch down.
Yes, there's no information, but the fact that they are using cargo planes is important because China can actually send things by rail. But whatever it is, it knows that it needs to get them in there very, very rapidly. So I think it's not unfair to assume that there's some kind of war material. These are huge cargo planes. They can carry all kinds of material. And I think that certainly the urgency suggests that whatever it is it has to do with war preparation.
Yeah, they need it now. Wow. Do you foresee any situation where if Iran starts to wobble? I mean, because a large share of oil that goes into China, let's say energy, that goes into China comes from Iran. You can imagine that if it's a more hostile government that takes over in Iran, if it's overthrown, that that is not going to be the case. And that's assuming that they're even having a trade relationship with China, especially in regards to energy. Who knows what that government is going to act like, especially if it acts something like Taiwan and it's hostile. Like, do you foresee a situation if Iran starts to wobble, that China gets more invested, more ensconced?
I think they already are invested. I mean, purely in terms of the oil numbers, China gets about 15% of its shipborne crude oil from Iran.
Yeah.
So it's a lot, but it is not a deal breaker. China has large strategic reserves. Anybody who's been paying attention to China's energy development, that it's going full out on sustainable energy. I mean, it is the world's greatest sustainable energy producer. We're talking about solar, wind, and also geothermal, as well as nuclear. They're bringing online entirely new generations of nuclear reactors, molten salt reactors, etc. So China is moving rapidly towards energy transition away from oil and carbon-based oil sources. So I think that's shifting. So it's not a deal breaker, but it is not good. But the other thing to remember is that it's not just Iran's oil, which is the issue. It's the entire oil producing region. If the Strait of Hormuz or the Bab el Mandeb or the Suez Canal are disrupted, then this results in an oil shortage for the rest of the world, which doesn't have, certainly the US, doesn't have the kind of sustainable energy grid that China already has in place. So the Chinese have been thinking this several moves out ahead. So I think that's the main point that is important
Yeah.
to understand. Mhm.
I am super curious on what China is thinking about the U.S. behavior on this,
Uh,
because you hit on a serious point. If gas goes to $400 a gallon, that is not just like that is. I know Iran has said once before there was like, we don't need a nuclear bomb, we have a nuclear bomb. And what they meant was, if we shut down the Strait of Hormuz, if we destroy South, Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc., those governments have been, lady doth protest too much, right? They've been opening their airspace. They're fair game just because they're now Johnny come latelys to Iran because they don't want their Quisling governments to be destroyed. A little bit late for that, especially if Iran is attacked. All bets are off. It's an existential war. Everything is on the table. The US has to know that. And yet, they're still going with this harebrained policy of attacking Iran at the behest. Or, I mean, Israel is a client state, it's a proxy, but all things being equal, there's a symbiosis and relationship between the two on this notion of getting rid of Iran for US power and control expansion in the region. What is China thinking in regards to the way they're looking at this in a geopolitical sense?
well, I think it sends several messages to China. I mean, I think the obvious point is that the U.S. is not agreement capable. We know that the U.S. Greenlighted Israel's attack while the process of negotiation was happening. They were supposed to meet on Sunday, and everybody thought, well, we have at least until Sunday, and then they attacked, I think, if I'm not mistaken, on Friday. So
Yeah.
it shows the kind of utter and total duplicity that the West engages in when it is quote unquote negotiating. Same as Minsk, same as any other process. Even during the run up to the Iraq War, there was this constant back and forth. All you have to do is do this, do this. And of course, we know that the war plans were already, etched in granite.
Yeah.
So I think the first message it sends is that the U.S. is not agreement capable, that is not rational. As I've said, it is in school shooter mode. So it is not, something that can really be, talked down, or it's a tough task. The second thing to understand is that what Israel is doing to Iran is Israeli war doctrine. It's their shock and awe doctrine, and it's something that they developed during the Yom Kippur War. Uh, it's aggressive decapitation strikes deep inside sovereign territory, preemptively, aggressive, always taking the initiative to quote unquote the enemy. This doctrine of war has become U.S. doctrine of war. So um, the U.S. has a doctrine of war called air-land battle, which is what they used on Iraq and other countries. And essentially, that doctrine of war is Israeli doctrine of war that it took from the Yom Kippur War, and then the U.S. has created something called air-sea battle. That is its doctrine of war for China. So the U.S. has already been preparing since 2009 a shock and awe doctrine of war against China. And all of this does is it sends the message to China that the U.S. Is not a good faith negotiator, and that it is preparing war just as it has been preparing war for Iran, just as was preparing war for every other country that it is attacked. So I think that China is undeceived. And of course, the larger big picture is Iran is one of the key pillars of the multipolar world. And
Yes.
it's the U.S. is systematically uh, attacking the pillars of the multipolar world. First, Russia through proxies, and now Iran, and of course, China is next on the menu. For a while there was a little bit of confusion because really inside the administration or administrations, there was a bit of a question around sequencing. What is the best sequence in which we go about this? But now the sequence has been laid clear. So it's Russia first. Russia is the starter. Iran is the salad, and then China will be the main dish. Okay, so we see that strategic sequencing laid out clearly, and we see the kind of division of labor that has already been set up. And what is clear is that these are gross strategic mistakes.
Yes.
The thing
Yes.
is that none of these countries are going to collapse or fall the way the U.S. thinks they will. Certainly, the Ayatollah has come out and said that we are not going to surrender, and you are in for a few surprises. The analogy, and it's a weak analogy, but it's like the idea that you think that you can throw a punch and get away with it, but if your first punch misses, and then you have to go down to the ground, then you're in for a completely different story. And without getting into a ground game, uh, you know ultimately nothing will actually shift. Air power in and of itself does not determine the outcome of wars. Ultimately, there has to be a ground game, and when it comes to a ground game, I don't think that Iran is going to buckle. We know this because in 1980, the U.S. used Iraq as a proxy to attack Iran. And boy, did they get their rear ends kicked, despite the U.S. Giving them chemical weapons, right? They gave them
Right.
the precursors for poison gas. And, Saddam Hussein used, uh, gassed the troops in Halabja and along the northern corridor. But still, the Iranians came back fiercely and forcefully. I don't know if you've had Mohammed Marandi, Professor Marandi,
He was
on.
in one of those chemical attacks.
Exactly. I mean, but if you look him up on the web, you realize that he was 16 when he was fighting that war.
Wow. Just wow. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of delusional people out there that believe their own hype. And I think Israel was one of them. I think they got so accustomed to shooting women and kids, burning babies alive, blowing up hospitals, fighting militias. Because if you're talking about Hezbollah, anybody who's bringing up Hezbollah as a fight is talking about somebody without air defense, without a state backing them in regards to a real proper state. And it's talking about a militia. And if you're bringing up Hamas to me, you're talking about even less than a militia. You're talking about a band of resistance fighters. And Syria, they didn't fight Syria. They just used to bomb Syria because Syria, again, didn't have the willingness to throw a punch because they didn't necessarily want to get involved in a larger war. Okay, well, this was existential for Iran. And they thought a sucker punch was going to be enough to win it, apparently. Or that at the very least, when they get into trouble, that the U.S. was going to get involved. I think that's the wild part. That's why I think your analogy is apt. It's like, oh, let me get a sucker punch. Like my boss, my old boss anyway, he was telling me about being at a wedding party. And this guy comes up to, I think either the groom or a friend of his, and sucker punches him and runs out the bar. And he chases the guy and beats the living shit out the guy to the point where the cops are called. And when the cops come, he's tied the guy up in a thing, meaning the guy wasn't ready for that. It's like you thought that your sucker punch was going to be the end of all things. And your sucker punch wasn't the end of all things. And so now your buildings are being blown up. Your spy network is being blown up. Your spy network in Iran itself is even being taken apart in many respects. Like you've expended a lot of capital in regard to the buildings that are being blown up. I can show images of Israelis not even having fuel now. They're sitting in a gas station fighting each other because they don't have fuel. They've been sitting in bomb shelters almost 24 hours. That is not sustainable over the course of several days when it's pretty clear that you're bombing, meaning they're not going to run out of missiles, but you will run out of air defense because you can see it as we're looking at it. The less and less air defense goes up, I would imagine, because they're trying to conserve it. And so it seems like all of this was planned to get the U.S. involved in it, one way or the other, whether Trump was stupid enough to believe that the Israelis can take it on their own or whether Trump just agreed. And I don't know if it matters one way or the other, but I agree with this bad strategy. You lost the war in Ukraine, and now you're embroiling yourself into a war in Iraq while the war in Ukraine is still going. You've given over air defense for 3 years, missiles, guns, bullets, all this stuff for 3 years. And now you are at a lack of it in your campaign in Israel. And you're supposed to now pivot to China? This seems mad to me. But maybe you have a better way of organizing this. It seems desperate, and maybe desperate in a way that doesn't necessarily seem to make all that much sense.
Well, I think the desperation part is certainly real, as is the irrationality. It completely
Yeah.
doesn't make sense unless you have a very distorted view of reality, unless you think like the neocons do, that you invent your own reality. So this is absolutely delusional, right? So they're already low on weapons, munitions. They also know that their supply chain, in particular rare earth elements, comes from China, right?
That's right.
And so they're going to go to war with China, or they're going to go with Iran, which is a major ally of China. And they don't think that that their supply chain doesn't rely on China, which has come out strongly in opposition, not only to the war but to Israeli aggression. I mean, they've taken sides. So there is a deep and profound irrationality, but we also have to remember that irrationality characterizes the imperial West. Capitalism is irrational at its core, from top to bottom. It's irrational. Any society that believes that brown sugar, sparkling sugar water can cure everything for you, is a fundamentally irrational society. And I think that people simply get high on their own supply. They imbibe the constant propaganda, and then they believe that they are capable of doing things that they are not actually capable of. But in the meantime, it's incredibly dangerous, and there's so much damage that is created. And so this is why we see this nonstop chaos. What is it? 100 plus countries, invaded since World War II. I mean, we
Yeah.
lose count at a certain point.
Is there anything that will bring China into the war directly?
Um,
I know that's a hard question to answer, especially from here, where
well,
we're.
it is a hard question to ask, but let's think about some of the precursors or the historical examples. During the Kosovo War, the U.S. bombed the Chinese embassy not once, but 6 times with guided munitions, and they killed embassy staff, including a newlywed couple, who were just journalists. Did China, and that could be considered an act of war. Did China go to war then? No, it didn't. Okay, it waited out, and it took the apology, but it didn't start a war. China is very, very slow, very, very reluctant to rouse to war. They're thinking of this in different terms. They're thinking of it in terms of probably the way that they conducted their own civil war, which is you do not confront the monster head on. You do not fight head on. What you do is you surround the city from the countryside and you build connections with everybody. The People's Liberation Army, actually the 4th Route and 8th Route Army at the time, simply just constantly build connections with all the communities, all the towns, all the ethnic minorities, which is why they're so strongly supported by the ethnic minorities. And then when they were ready, they knocked out the KMT. And I don't think China feels that it's ready right now to go directly to kinetic war. Iran is still a long distance away. There's India and Uzbekistan between Iran and China. So if it were to try and project power over those long distances, it would be pulled off. So it's a little bit like, in the martial arts, the Tai Chi, fighter, they will not act out of balance. They will always wait for you to come to them before they unbalance you. And that's what they're preparing. So I don't see China as getting involved kinetically, but I think there are other asymmetrical means. Certainly, China understands the score. It understands what the strategic sequencing is. It understands that what the U.S. Is doing to Israel is also what it has planned for China itself. And it will, I think, defend itself at the time and at the place of its own choosing.
That's fair. I mean, that's fair. It is a heavy lift to go kinetic into a war where you're dragging your country into, especially against what is most likely going to be another superpower. If you can use your own proxy, in this case, and that proxy at this point would be Iran, who is in a existential fight, you're better off at that distance. I mean, this goes to the whole thing for Iran and Syria too, right? But Iran sat there and didn't necessarily, let's say, get involved in a way that would have allowed it some distance from the front, even though the wolf was coming and the monster was slowly walking through the countryside, coming to its door. And I guess I feel the same way about China and Russia. The monster is slowly walking through the countryside, taking its time, going from house to house, and would eventually be at their door. And is their lot in life better with Iran still on the chessboard or off? And the same thing is true for Russia. Is their lot in life better with it being on the chessboard or off? And if the response is, well, it's better that it is on the chessboard because we have far more strategic options, if it is, and if China and Russia knows that, does that force them into this, even if it's not direct in the context of Iran, but even if it's against Taiwan, or even if it's Russia just going bananas in Ukraine, like meaning they both have to know what is happening here in a geopolitical sense. That in the same way that Ukraine wasn't really about Ukraine, Iran is not exactly entirely about Iran by itself. There are geopolitical consequences with the empire trying to maintain itself. And if Iran wins, empire dies. I mean, that is a hell of a dagger to put into the chest, to the throat cavity of an empire that has been ravenous, that has been knocking through countries left and right. If Iran loses, that's different. That's all. That's the reason why I asked. It just seems like there is larger geopolitical significance of Iran existing, even beyond Syria existing, that I think if Iran could go back in time, maybe it would have been better for Iran if Syria was still on the map, as opposed to where it is now, with those missiles flying perfectly through Syria, with those planes being loaded perfectly through Syria. That's why I ask. I'm not asking this because I want a world war, even though that seems to be where it's going. I'm asking this because it seems like the goal of isolate and conquer and then move to the next seems to be in play, even though they're incompetent in the way they do it.
You know, yeah, so this is a very, very critical and dangerous juncture. Clearly, the sequencing is happening. You know, they're trying to chew through these different countries as they get closer and closer to China. Now, the thing to note is that it's not working. You know, everything that they have planned is not going to plan, despite the viciousness, the aggressiveness, the sheer genocidal intent of this. But let's think of the counter factual scenario that China was pulled into a war with Iran. What do you think the response in the U.S. would be, or in the U.S. ruling class would be?
Just to be clear, I just want to nail down. I'm not saying that China should get involved.
Yeah.
And it is. I don't think any country wants to be on the brink of a nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my argument is based in what I've been seeing. Mm-hmm. That everything that these countries have tried to do mm-hmm. has only bought them what they haven't wanted. Mm-hmm. And so Syria is trying to be an appeasement country. It mm-hmm. gets taken down. Lebanon, Hezbollah, they get trashed and just, decimated. Iran has done anything in their power to negotiate. And what happened? They used that negotiation as a ploy to attack Iran. And just because Iran is standing now, they have taken heavy casualties and damage, just like Israel has taken damage. Mm-hmm. And even with Russia, with the Minsk agreements, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that Russia was going to be able to withstand the economic and military might of all of NATO and the U.S. combined. Mm-hmm. So we don't know what's going to happen with Iran in this situation. They could fall in real terms. So my argument is not China should get involved. I want to make that very clear. I am even squishy saying that Iran was wrong for appeasement. Mm-hmm. That I make that argument only from the context of where we are now, in the sense that all these countries, as they collapse, now you're by yourself, and now you have to fight this war alone. Mm-hmm. But that is illustrative of something, right? And if that monster was always coming to your door, do you want to deal with that monster single-handedly, one-on-one, or do you want to deal with that monster with other countries in coordination? Mm-hmm. And I guess when I'm looking at China and I'm looking at Russia, yes, they're helping, they're giving assistance. And they're giving assistance in a similar way that they gave to Russia. we don't want to be a part of this. We will help you in every way we can for you to fight back that monster off. And maybe if we give you enough assistance, you can fight it off. If we get involved, then this immediately escalates to a potential war, third world war, where nuclear missiles can be exchanged, and we don't want that. The problem that I have is that the proactive component to that is always willing to put nukes on the table. Meaning the US is always willing to put nukes on the table. Like the very act of what they're doing in Iran is putting nukes on the table and saying, if anybody else gets involved, you know what can happen, which forces everybody to back away from that process. I don't know. It's complicated. I don't know a way out of that box. I just don't. And maybe that's what I'm banging my head on. Give me a breakdown of it, though. Maybe you can give me some better assessment than I'm coming up with.
Well, once again, I don't want to get, too much into the history, but, China has always had very good relations with Iran. And for example, during the Tang Dynasty, they were very, very close to the Sasanian dynasty. And when the Sasanian dynasty was attacked, China, the Tang dynasty did send troops and tried to fight alongside it. It wasn't one of their major expeditions, and eventually the empire fell, and the leaders of the Sasanian empire, they actually just went to China and became high court officials. And so they gave refuge and they became part of the Chinese, court, but they did not, stick it out and fight. So China is averse to foreign adventures. It is averse to fighting wars in other countries. But that doesn't mean that it won't give, support. And certainly the closer it comes to the boundaries, the stronger the support will be. The example being, for example, Korea. During the Korean War, China sent 3 million troops and workers and handed the US the first strategic loss, really, after World War II. Same thing in, for example, Vietnam. In the case of Vietnam, China sent 300,000 troops. Not as large as Korea, but still significant. They didn't send, troops that were actually fighting, but they sent, technicians and people to man, air defense, etc. So they have their own logic and strategy, and they see their own, capacities. They measure their own capacities. But what they don't want is to be pulled into a war that the US wants to initiate, because we know that the US wants to initiate a war right now, and they would like nothing better than to say, look, China is part of the axis of evil, and therefore we're going to trigger our war right now using Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. I mean, this is what's being set up right now. The Chinese are not going to be pulled into the US game. They're going to react on their own time, at their own measure, and when they feel that they need to act decisively. And I know it's frustrating. People say,
"No, I like I told you, my thinking. Look, I was born and raised in this country, right? My understanding of the world is through an American context. And in the same way that we are over there right now saying we're going to fight for Israel, which is just madness to me, right? But it is a proactive, meaning we built our military in order to attack. We didn't build a military for defense. We didn't do air defense per se. We built airplanes in order to go and bomb and decimate and kill as many people as possible. How could I not be infected with that mindset? So this is not me. I'm not taking an argument that China should get involved. I guess I'm asking strategic questions. And those strategic questions are real. Like, meaning China can take that point of view. God bless them. They can do it. Russia can take that point of view if it wants. God bless them. Iran took that point of view. And Iran is out there by itself right now, dealing with a monster that's at its gates, that is trying to take its heart out, that has murdered hundreds of thousands of human beings and will murder every man, woman, and child in Iran if it had the opportunity to do so. Meaning, I'm trying to set the stakes to what Iran is effectively facing. And that is the same monster that is being backed by Europe and backed by America. And that if it gets the opportunity, would do the same thing to Russia. And if it gets the opportunity, would do the same thing to China. So when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the US is obviously trying to create a NATO for China. The US has already created a NATO for Russia. Russia's already fighting NATO as we speak, with basically being militarily surrounded, even though Russia has been able to hold its own and push back the monster from its gates, per se. It's still in that fight, and it's winning that fight. But it didn't know, did not know off the top of his head if it could do it, especially starting off with 150,000 people. And I understand China's point, right? Like, we are not going to involve our people into a conflict if we can avoid it. I totally get it. And I would be the same, especially this early. It'd be like, okay, let's let this play out. Like Obama, let it play out. Let's see what happens. Maybe the US doesn't get involved. Maybe there's a de-escalation. Maybe Trump comes back from the brink. And so there's the people screaming that China should immediately flip out of their minds when you don't really know what is happening on the ground in real terms. The fact that they're giving military assistance is a big help by itself, just like it was with Russia and China. Just keeping the supply lines open is a phenomenal help. So I just want to be very clear. I am, and so it sounds like, and even as I say it, it sounds like I'm making this argument of, hey man, there's a monster coming. You better beware that there's a monster coming. It's that. But the argument is not that they should get involved. The argument is, I guess I'm curious on how they view it, knowing that the monster is coming and knowing that if Iran falls, that they're left alone. They could say that we're working in tandem with Russia, fair enough, but they will be militarily diminished by every bit as much as Syria was military, or Russia was military diminished by Syria collapsing. I don't know an answer to that. And maybe that's why I folded in my head this way.
I have, first thing, I think it's not what you're saying, but I do hear it as kind of a general argument. Why isn't China doing this, that, and the other? And then, how do they see it? I have no particular interest, no particular insight into the what the Chinese government is thinking or planning.
Strategy-wise,
All I know is that they're thinking about it very, very hard, and they're working strategically, and they're also thinking long-term about it. I think the other thing to point out is I think China really wants a different paradigm of global affairs. They want a different paradigm of security. The Western approach is, somebody's fighting, you just go in there and, just pile into the fight. It's a bar fight, everybody join in, that's their mindset. The Chinese don't think that way. They want to see if they can shift things in a different direction. The realist view, this is, and others, the realist view is that when you have this type of situation, the only way to resolve it or to balance it is to bandwagon, right? So you bandwagon on one side or the other, and then what that results in is greater and greater escalation. The Germans are already piling in. Germans were already, sending tanker planes, right, to help the Israelis. And now they're coming out and saying, Iran needs to negotiate. If they negotiate, we can find a good way to end this. That's BS, right? They were negotiating. For them to come out and say that is absurd. But once again, if we get into this realist paradigm where you're simply bandwagoning on both sides, then the war simply gets bigger and bigger and more intense. China's approach is, can we have a different approach to things?
GPS signal lost.
Sorry about that.
You're fine.
The Chinese approach is, can we move away from this realist paradigm into a paradigm of mutual security where we don't have to be constantly seeking and looking for war? The Chinese say the Chinese are very reluctant to go to war. If you go to the Chinese capitals, look at all their streets. They're named for peace, the great peace, the long peace, the earthly peace, the heavenly peace, etc. In the US, all the streets are named for war. They're named for right? It's a completely different mindset. The Chinese say that if you have good iron, you do not use it to make nails. Okay? What does that mean? It means that there are better uses of humans and resources than to deploy them in war. So they are thinking things in a different way. They want to create, as far as I can tell, a shift away from this, Western paradigm of constant war and de-escalate.
I
And
accept that.
also the truth that you have a very, very dangerous, belligerent, as I said, school shooter at your door. What we see right now is, I mean, let's just put ourselves in Iran's shoes. They've had their top military and government, a large part of their top military and government officials killed, right? In an aggressive war that was unprovoked. If you can, imagine that, Iran or China or some other country had killed off, Pete Hegseth, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, as well as your negotiators, and had also killed off Palmer Luckey and that, Palantir. Uh, 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 what's that?
Yeah, Palantir. I know you're talking about the guy who looked like he touches himself to killing puppies. I know you're talking about.
Right, right. And Eric Schmidt and all these people had been killed off preemptively and entire blocks razed, while this was happening. How would the US respond to this? This is what has just happened, right? So how is Iran going to respond to that? Are they simply going to capitulate and surrender as Trump has demanded, or are they going to fight back? Let's look back at the historical example when Iraq attacked Iran. Iran was actually in complete chaos at the time. It had just had the revolution. Iraq attacked because it considered Iran to be at its weakest. Its army was in complete disarray because of the revolution. And yet, within months, they reconstituted their capacity to fight. They sent waves of children to fight, of which, Mohammed, Professor Sayed Marandi was one of these, very, very young soldiers. And they fought this kind of brutal World War I type of battle, and they prevailed despite, being gassed and attacked with, chemical weapons. So I think that anybody who thinks that this is going to be a cakewalk for the United States or Israel is completely misguided. As I said, it goes down to the ground. At the end, all wars involve are ground wars, and if it goes down to the ground, neither Israel nor the U.S. Have the capacity to prevail. They will find themselves in yet another Iraq.
I think I understand your point. To summarize, this is any notion that Iran is going to collapse is nonsense. And this is going to be a far more protracted war. And because it's going to be far more protracted, the assistance that China or maybe even Russia or Pakistan or North Korea would give is going to be a massive and necessary lifeline. But if any of these countries get involved militarily, they only make the situation worse and inflame it, and even bring the world to the brink of nuclear devastation. And so even though it is going to be a tough day, to put it radically mildly, for Iran in the sacrifice that they're going to have to make, that overall it's a better outcome than bringing the world to nuclear oblivion by everybody piling in the way that the U.S. would. Is that fair? The way to put it?
I think that's a fair summary. I mean, it's all, we don't know. There are too many unknowns in this, but I think that we can say that an immediate escalation, which
it's insane. Yeah.
What will happen to world war, is not the best outcome.
Agreed.
Whatever happens will be protracted, and because it's protracted, this gives room for measured measured approaches, including negotiation as well as logistical support. But whatever the U.S. is getting into, it is getting into something that it doesn't know what it that it's not prepared for. You know, I mean, just
Agreed.
kind of the general thing. I said, the Chinese don't like war. They're not a warrior, class. It's not a warrior culture, and this is because again, this is this is my opinion, is humans are not designed to kill each other. Okay, it's actually really hard for humans to kill other humans, and when they do, first it requires tremendous training, indoctrination, and kind of a kind of a killing of your own soul in order
Mhm.
to prepare that process. And then even after this, after they perpetrate these kinds of murders, many, not all, because there is a psychopathic class, but many of them suffer tremendously after this. You look at all the vets that come back from, for example, U.S. wars. They come back
Yeah.
with PTSD. That PTSD is really moral injury. It's not caused because you were, because you were injured, or because the people around you, your comrades were killed. It's because you were a perpetrator or a witness to atrocities that your moral framework finds unacceptable. It's kind of a assertion that you're not psychologically weak. That used to be the traditional framing, that you were psychologically weak and therefore you're not tough enough, and therefore you came back traumatized. No, it's because you're ethically strong, and your strong ethics does not allow such extraordinary violations, of humanity. So
Mhm.
it's not easy for humans to kill other humans. What's necessary is distance. So modern war is all about creating physical distance. It's also about creating psychological distance, othering, and it's also about, and so that's the work of propaganda, and it's also about creating moral distance, that we are morally superior to them. That's why all you have to do is look at Israeli propaganda. You
Yeah.
see this process of distancing that facilitates and enables this murder, this murderous, rampage. But at core, the act of war against your own species, the killing of your own species, is actually a very, very unnatural thing that requires tremendous manipulation and tremendous indoctrination, and still works imperfectly. Which is why anytime you go to war, you come back and you will see the blowback in your own communities. People who come back are ravaged, destroyed, they have moral injury, or they perpetrate the same kind of violence against their own society, because once you've turned on, they don't know how to turn off. It's something that the chicken hawks don't really understand, because they've never been to war. uh, they sit back in their comfortable uh, you know uh, houses, and just dream up of these plans of domination and violence, but it never works out that way. Just one more example. During the
Yeah.
Civil War, they have done analyses of the Civil War soldiers, and they used to have these guns. Um, I forget the word, but you have to load them individually
Right.
after each shot. Yeah,
Yeah. Flint rifles.
yes, those rifles. And historians have gone back and looked at these large Civil War battles and rifles, and they find that these rifles are often stuffed with 10, 12, 13, 14 pellets, and then you find the dead soldier with his rifle. Well, what has been going on? Well, what they haven't been firing. They've been taking their smoothbore muskets and they've been filling them with ammunition, going through the motions, pretending to fire, and each time they don't fire. So it's not easy to get soldiers to kill, and especially when you close the distance and you move into a ground game, that becomes a completely different story. Of course, people who are fighting to defend themselves will defend themselves and their family and their land and their territory. But if the U.S. thinks that it can go yet into another expeditionary war in a country that is 3 times the size of Iraq, that has centuries, if not millennia, of resisting and fighting foreign invaders, I think they're in for, completely different. I think they're in for something completely different.
From your mouth to God's ears, it is my fervent wish that Iran destroys its enemies as an absolute. The notion that we have been engaged in these hateful, bloodthirsty bloodlettings. I mean, in Syria, they were selling black slaves, for God's sake. And just look at what they were doing in Gaza. And by the way, we all watched it. Like, it wasn't even like they did this behind the scenes. They're doing this at this point with impunity. In the old days, they weren't, and we could end it on this. In the old days, when they found out that Ronald Reagan had kill squads in South America, people were shocked by it. Oh my God, America doesn't supposed to do this. We're supposed to believe in freedom and love and light and Coca-Cola and, Santa Claus and whatever the hell else. It is outrageous that we are getting money from Iranians, supposedly our enemies, in order to pay kill squads, in order to kill Sandinistas in South America. And Reagan, I remember distinctly, this was my first, maybe main political moment of awareness, of memory, where you had the Iran-Contra affair. Reagan comes on TV. They have the old picture that they used to have and all that stuff. And Reagan gives this astonishing speech where he points out, I didn't know anything about it. I was blissfully unaware, but I'm the Gipper. And so the buck stops with me. You guys have a phenomenal day. There were no consequences for Ronald Reagan on this. There were no retribution. The only person, Colonel North, Colonel North, I think, was the one who effectively took the lightning rod of all the attention. And you fast forward to maybe 40 years later, where everybody knows that Obama is engaged in a regime change war in Syria, and nobody gives a shit. And they know that he's trying everything in his power to knock over their government. Everybody knows the Bush lied in Iraq, killing 1 million Iraqis. Nobody gives a shit. Everybody knows that, we were directly related to the creation of ISIS. Nobody gives a shit. Meaning, we have come to the assessment that they're disposable people. And in the process of those disposable people, if those people die, get killed, wiped away in any particular fashion, not a big deal. It's not us. Who cares? And now we have moved on in the Middle East now to Syria, where they're murdering Alawites, Christians, something that we said exactly was going to happen the moment that Assad was overthrown. And now they're trying to do the same thing to Iran. And so my audience will say I've become a hard ass. That's why. That shit needs to stop. And when you realize that your country is a purveyor of evil in the way that it is operating almost systematically, going from one place to the next and creating this chaos around the globe, it needs to be stopped. There needs to be something that stops this. This is empire. It's not to our best interest. So I want to be very clear. It's not that I want the Chinese to get involved into a fight. It's not that I want any of these people to get into a fight. I would wager Iran didn't want to get into a fight. They did everything in their power to avoid it. I would imagine the Russians didn't want to get into a fight. They did everything in their power to avoid it. But bullies only understand getting a broken nose. And unfortunately, hopefully that broken nose can stay with Iran having that fight where it doesn't expand. But I don't know. And I think this world, I think you're right, that they're going to run into a buzzsaw. I don't think Iran is going to just capitulate in a way that they think they may. But I think we are in for some dark times, especially in the next few weeks.
I mean, I'm sorry to keep, harping on Professor Morandi. But you before, he's a man of letters. He's a, deeply humane individual. He's a professor of literature, and yet he went to war.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that people here don't understand, that everybody in Iran will take up arms and resist if their country is invaded or
Yeah.
attacked in this brutal, vicious, and let's emphasize illegal fashion. It's completely illegal. Everything that is happening right now, it's a violation of international law. If there's any concept of international law, all of this is a complete and total violation, threatening,
Agreed.
invading a sovereign country with aggressive war, knocking out their government, threatening their leader, threatening their people on no grounds. I mean, all of this is illegal from top to bottom, and
Yeah.
it's clear that I think that the Iranians will fight. I've heard from my own Iranian colleagues, some of them are extreme left. They don't like, the religious government, but they have said to me that if this happens, I will pick up arms and I will fly back to Iran and I
For your
will
country.
arms and I will fight for my country. That's
Wow.
something that I think that the U.S. doesn't understand and doesn't calculate, because it doesn't understand. The U.S. has never been invaded, on its own territory, so it doesn't understand the desire of people to resist. It. This is why it keeps losing wars. Every war where it has invaded another country, and I don't count Grenada and Panama as wars. They were essentially police actions. But every time it goes to war, it miscalculates the desire of people to resist and maintain the integrity of their country.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that's important for people who are upset about this war, and certainly many of us are, certainly I am, is that the solution is not to say, let's you and him fight. The solution is not to say somebody else should do something. The question to ask is really what we can do, because
Right.
at the end of the day, the call is coming from within the house. We are the purveyors, as Martin Luther King put it, the greatest
Our
purveyor
fault. Yeah.
of violence. So then the question becomes, what can we do? How can we, put some, friction into the machine? And I don't have, have a list of things to do, but I think that it's not too hard to figure out, where the agents of this violence are. You just look at the media, you see who these people are and what they're saying. The tech companies that are facilitating this. All of this it's an interconnected system. But what it
Yeah.
also means is there are many places in which you can at least put some friction, put some sand into the gears of this war machine. And
Mhm.
then, of course, the most important thing is not to get trapped by the propaganda, because that is such a constant thing that we are being subject to. People fall into it without thinking. They fall into it just as a matter of habit because they've been exposed to it so often. So you also have to resist the indoctrination, and it's almost kind of like you have to degauss your mind every so often, because there's so much, interference. So you have to kind of degauss yourself and then think clearly and then decide, what is it that I and my communities can do it for the cause of peace? How do we slow down this war machine? How do we prevent us from escalating into a world war? Just one last comment.
Please.
You mentioned Santa Claus, okay, and Santa is really, really important because he is one of the kind of archetypes of indoctrination. At a
Yes.
very young age, many young people are indoctrinated into the myth of Santa Claus. And although they forget about Santa Claus, the lessons that Santa Claus has imparted into you remain. So, what are the lessons? Okay, the lessons of Santa Claus are the myth of satisfied labors. Little elves build toys in Santa's workshop and they're delighted to be exploited, right? Okay. You have of
I never thought of it that way, but yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
you have the myth of spontaneous generation of wealth. Essentially, you go to sleep and, miraculously, wealth appears. This is what the capitalists refer to as the miracle of compound interest or the miracle of good investing, right? Just wealth appears spontaneously. That's a myth. You also have, this notion of this myth of commodities, that they have no past or history or social relations, when actually they're congealed labor, or more often they're congealed packaged labor of a package of human suffering. And
Yes.
then there's this myth of abundance and benevolence, that we live in this abundant and benevolent world where good children wake up rich with gifts delivered from a benevolent mystical figure. That's absolutely the opposite. Millions of people every single night, most of them children, they go to bed hungry without the barest necessity. And when Christmas comes around, it means they get a boot in the face and they have punishingly intensive work in sweatshops. There's this myth of justice, that if you're good, you get good things, right? This is, everybody gets what they want, and if they don't, they've been bad, right?
Yes.
And then it's this notion that anyway, I could go on, but this is the myth of the market. This is frictionless distribution, barrierless entry, no externalities, perfect knowledge of what is needed, perfect equilibrium and satisfaction. All of these myths are packaged very neatly in the
Santa Claus.
in Santa, and
So
you
right.
this from a very, very young age, and then you grow up and you discard the Santa piece, but you believe all the other indoctrination. And so this is the kind of way in which we've been so completely indoctrinated.
Oh,
And so
that's
this
so
is why
good.
we get rid of.
Oh, so good, KJ. That's so good. Yeah, just because you're good doesn't mean good things happen to you. KJ, you are always fantastic. Thank you for this. And you're right, by the way. Last question, and this could be quick. It feels, and I don't know if this is true, it feels this way, that there's more friction in this war than it was with Iraq. Meaning there seems to be more people who are more open to say, this is fucking outrageous. Why are we doing this? And even the American public seems to be like, this is fucking outrageous. Why are we doing this? I mean, it's like 70% that think this is insane.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the MAGA, there's sectors of the MAGA, right, that are absolutely incensed. Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan, they are coming out against this war. They're denouncing, criticizing Trump for this. So, this is not trivial. So, if the right, can make a stand and can speak out against the war, certainly the left can. As well. And I think that's what needs to happen. People need to speak out against this war and other wars, and of course against the genocide in Palestine. But the thing that we have to do away with, and again, this is the indoctrination of Santa. The Santa myth is that if we close our eyes and go to sleep, then we get what we want or deserve, right? That is the ultimate indoctrination. All you have to do is just be ignorant. The ignorance will get you what you want. Going to sleep will get you what you want. It won't. Okay, so that's the fundamental myth that we have to do away with. That we actually have to wake up. We have to open our eyes, see what's going on, and start to take action.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. You're fan-fucking-tastic, KJ. Thank you for this, man. KJ, no. Like I said, you're easily a fan favorite. KJ, do you know we have 5,000 people here today? I shit you not. I've never had this many people. And they start tacking up when you got here. The audience loves you, man. KJ Noah is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. He's contributed to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator. Once censored by Amazon, it is available at iacenter.org. You can find KJ at the China Report on Breakthrough News Network. KJ, when is your next show coming out? I always ask you this because I want the audience to know where they can find you.
It comes out on Tuesdays, and I'm on every other Tuesday.
Every other Tuesday. Okay. Oh, okay. You're on every other Tuesday. Okay. Fair enough. You have a fantastic day. It is early in the morning for you. So enjoy your day, man. Thank you for this. Really, I deeply appreciate your commentary today. Thank you for this. All right, guys, we have come to the end of another show. KJ is just fantastic. I deeply appreciate him joining